Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Hello?
Sumo, are you there?
Oh, you just sort of went, I thought you felt like you went, vanished for a second, but you didn't.
Well, I'm slipping in and out of existence this morning.
Do you think Dolly Parton, takes vaccines?
I don't know.
You know, she sang Jolene. So.
I don't get it.
It makes you think. Well, just think about it.
I mean,
You know what I mean?
I'm thinking, but
Jolene.
still not getting it.
Well, then you could like, yeah, I don't know. She just strikes me as a lady that is of a certain class.
Mm-hmm.
And that class, maybe doesn't need traditional medicine.
She's just,
or I should say, Western medicine.
Oh, okay. So maybe she's into Twitter herbalism.
Maybe I think there's a lot more overlap between herbalism and people that live in trailer parks and people that sing the people that live in trailer parks than one might imagine.
Yeah, you know, folk medical traditions are still a thing.
Yeah, they are. I think we're supposed to talk about now. I was going to talk about. I was going to get the vaccine, right?
You were going to go get it?
When I went, every nurse in front of me that got it collapsed on the floor and died. So I hold off for a little bit.
Okay, that was good.
May try Monday.
Maybe they'll have the kinks worked out by then.
The kinks worked out by then. That was a silly video. Did you see that one where she was like?
I did. Yeah, she just kind of dropped over.
Well, the big problem with that, see, it's Did you see the picture of her receiving the shot?
Yeah, she like had her hands folded in prayer, sort of.
Prayer.
Yeah.
As if that was very strange. I mean, it's just further confirmation that when you try to get religion out of society, it just manifests in new ways.
Okay, so you're seeing the posture and the fainting as evidence of a religious experience being had around receiving the COVID vaccine?
Maybe. I mean, definitely the posture, because what it is so you work up a big to do.
Yep.
And you say, "Oh, Sky Daddy, science, come save us."
Mm-hmm.
And then the vaccine arrives, and everyone celebrates. And then when they receive it, they actually just fold their hands as if in prayer, like it's a sacrament.
Interesting. And, you know, kind of, if you put it in that context, all this, the lockdowns and the mask and all that stuff could be, you know, going through some sort of procession of penance and humiliation before receiving the blessing of Saigon.
Yeah, it's all religious. Like, all of it. Like, you know, like people, like that's why people have been signaling their devotion to quote unquote God or this God by saying, I've been in lockdown. I haven't left my house in 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
That is how great my devotion is.
Yeah.
That is how devoted I am. Like, I haven't seen my family in a year. That's how devoted to God I am. In air quotes, God.
Mm-hmm.
Science God. Right. And then when you get the vaccine, it's like, aha, now God has entered into my body, like a body the same size, like me floating into you.
No,
and you floating into
it's
me.
back. No.
You know what I mean?
No.
That's what it is. And because it's this weird. It's like it delivers you from the. It's a very weird. There's all these public rituals. I mean, like the public ritual of hand washing that is extremely religious.
Yeah.
It's like you walk into a building, and everyone wants you to put something and wash your hands with alcohol.
Right.
Right, which is again a religious substance, alcohol.
Yeah, the aqua vitae.
Aqua vitae. You put it on, and then it's like before you touch any objects, you must bless your hands.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Ritual purification wash.
Ritual purification, and it is just ritual purification because that's not doing very much.
That's interesting. Yeah, my principal objection to mask wearing, my first one, is that I consider it to be the symbol of devotion to a pagan religion.
And it is.
And it's looking more and more like it is.
Yeah, like you can't because this is just. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, you know. In the French Revolution, they worshipped rationalism. They took churches and they made them centers of reason, which just meant places to be gay. And then it's all it ever means. It's all it ever means. And then they made like courtyards, places where you would do reason worship, like debates and whatnot.
Right. Oh, I lost you, Sumo. Can you hear me?
Hello, are you there?
There you are. Are you doing your local recording, BT Dubs?
No, I'm not. I'm about to start. I'm going to start. So if you guys hear a difference in audio quality about now, it's because I just started doing the good recording.
Right.
Right now. Here's the good record. Okay, now there we go.
Now the listeners can fully appreciate all the work that we do.
I know. I'm very forgetful. And see, I just forgot what I was going to say.
That's okay.
But yeah, it's all a religious narrative. It's all just people devoting themselves to.
Well, you were talking about the French Revolution, religion of reason. I thought that was a very interesting.
Oh yeah, the religion
parallel.
of reason. They took the churches and they made them places of quote unquote reason, or cathedrals of reason, and then that just always means places to do sex. It's all it ever means. And then they took the courtyards and stuff, and like, here's where we'll have debates, and we'll have the glorification of the mind, right?
That's interesting to look at the idea of debate as a religious ritual for the reason worshiping folks. And then how many Christians get all psyched up about engaging in theological debate, which I've never really found very edifying for anybody.
So, Smokestack has been killed.
We're going to drop again?
As far as I can tell, by...
We have data problems this morning.
The Jesuits, and he has disappeared. I don't know where he is. I'm looking for him. He just vanished.
Data problems. I can't hear anything.
But yeah, I mean the here's the thing. Hold on. Let me find him. You know,
this is terrible.
Dolly Parton's Jolene is actually a good song, though. One of the better country songs of that era. Here, we're gonna call him back. Boop 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 boop. Calling. Hello.
Okay, you're back. I'm gonna leave my video off. It seems the Illuminati are trying to shut us down or something.
Well,
we're talking about COVID. That's the problem.
I switched over to a different internet on my side.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been attacked by the space Jesuits in every which way this week.
Man.
They I I had a bunch of, so this is why this episode may be a little scattered. I had some notes for what I wanted to talk about, and then they just reset my phone, this factory defaults.
Oh no.
They were just going, and they were like, boom. I mean, it's fine because I don't really keep anything of value on my phone. But it's annoying. You know what I mean? I was just going along, and then it was like, oh, your phone doesn't work anymore. You better reset it.
They don't have a lot of power, but they have the power to really annoy you.
Yeah, it's really annoying. That's all it is. What were we talking about? Am I still recording? I don't know what's going on.
You're still recording on my end. Okay,
boop, boop,
good.
Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, I'm still recording. Okay.
Just keep it on.
Yeah, so anyway, it's all religious. I think that's what I was getting at.
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know,
I think you're right.
I mean, even when you walk into a building and they want to take your temperature, you bow your head so they can take your temperature.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, all the postures are very religious. And so, and my point is, like, worshiping a vaccine is not a very good religion.
No.
It's sort of dumb. And having the devil as a virus as, like, the common cold. See, Jesuits, we're not going to stop talking about the thing. You can cut off our internet, but we're going to still keep going. Do you see?
Can't stop the signal, Mal.
You can't stop the signal. That's right. Even if that assassin black guy comes and stabs us with his katanas.
Who? What?
Wasn't that in the movie?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, he had katanas because in space you need katanas.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so on the vaccine news, I think personally the vaccine is probably not terribly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because, but on the other hand, I'm not certain of that. Like, people are like, there's this mantra. It's even mantras. You hear the mantras, like they repeat mantras, like safe and effective, safe and effective.
Yeah.
You know, it's safe and effective, and it's like, well, you don't know that though. Like, when that nurse fainted after she got it, immediately the doctors present were like, "Oh, it had nothing to do with the vaccine. She just." And I was like, did you do blood work in the past 3 minutes?
Yeah, how do you know that? Right.
You can't know that it didn't, or it was an allergic reaction or something. Like, what are you talking about? Like, people just on basically their declarations of faith.
Yeah.
Like, it couldn't be the vaccine, right? Or the people that developed Bell's palsy or whatever palsy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, that wasn't that either. That was just. Did you read that? They were like, oh yeah, they took that, and then they all had palsy, but that wasn't because of the vaccine.
Right.
That was because they just are in the risk category of suddenly developing palsy after receiving an injection.
Yeah, that risk category.
That risk category. That's all that was. And then they. So there's no. I mean, there's not. It's like when you remember when hydrochloroquine was really dangerous, despite it being on the shelf for 60 years, and we know all about it.
Oh, we're gonna talk about that this morning, son.
Yeah, and so hydrochloroquine was very dangerous. It was so dangerous. Remember, everyone was like, you might OD. It was bad. Now, hydrochloroquine has been in existence for like 60 years, like I said, on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
We know pretty much all you can know about the effects of hydrochloroquine.
Yep.
It's also extremely cheap because it's been around so long, it's no longer like copyrighted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a nickel or whatever. And that was very dangerous. But then the vaccine, which has done no human or animal trials of any sufficiency whatsoever, is safe and effective. Mm-hmm. It's nonsense. It's dumb. Anyone that thinks about it for a few minutes can see it's just faith-based religion of science. It's like, because that doesn't make, like, what do you mean you're gonna be like, oh, we know it's safe, and like, no, you don't. Like, you don't know if there are long-term effects. There might. I think there probably aren't, to be fair. But you can't say that from a scientific perspective, like,
right,
because you haven't done the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say there are no long-term effects because it hasn't existed long-term. Like, you just don't know. No one has had it for more than like 2 weeks. You
Yep.
don't know if it has any long-term effects. Like, that's one of the reasons they have a long process at the FDA, or did, for approving new drugs. In theory, was you wanted to see, like, well, does this affect anything we don't see right away? Like, let's check back on these people in a year, do blood work, look at their life conditions. Is it okay? Let's
Mm-hmm.
check back in 3 years. Let's check back in 4. And like after 4 years or so, or 5, if nothing's showing up, it's unlikely that something's going to show up, right? Although sometimes it still does, even later. Like sometimes you get an increase of cancer or something that's like, a small effect, but not,
Yep.
that sort of thing. So you can't, to say that, like, especially when it's a new type of vaccine, totally, like an mRNA vaccine
Mm-hmm.
that's never been done on people before, and you just know it's safe and effective. We know it. It just is. It just is. Like, it might be. I think it probably is. Personally, if I had to bet money on it, and there were 2 categories, and it's like, put your money on this one or this one, I'd put on it probably safe.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that, like, as a doctor or a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd be like, well, we don't. My answer would be, we don't know if it's safe, because that would be the correct answer.
Exactly. And if
But
you want to follow the science here, there's
yeah,
a lot more science on those early COVID therapies that are cheap and safe and probably effective. Hydroxychloroquine being just one of them.
yeah,
But everybody that wanted to talk about that was ridiculed, and then lo and behold, I don't know how many of you out in the audience saw this dust up online last week, but it appeared from the reporting that the AMA had rescinded their recommendation against using or prescribing hydroxychloroquine for phase 1 COVID.
I saw that. Now, you said appeared. Did it not? Was it not like it appeared?
Right. It appeared to me that way first, but here's what really happened. I did the homework on this.
Okay.
So at the November meeting, the delegation of the AMA from Georgia introduced a resolution 509, basically stating that hydroxychloroquine is safe and effective. The ADA needs to reverse its recommendation, and they made some very good arguments, and they among other things, noted that all the studies that were cited by the people saying that it was dangerous to use this, all those studies have been rescinded, or retracted by the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. And so
we're going to talk about the New England Journal of Medicine. But yeah.
all those studies that they were citing when they were telling us that this is dangerous drug, Trump is killing people, blah blah blah, they've been retracted. And they cited a lot of it's been in use in the USA where available, despite the AMA, and it's been used in other countries and has shown general effectiveness, and doctors want to use it. Many doctors want to use it and cannot. Right. And so that went before the November meeting of the American Medical Association House of Delegates, and it was not adopted. It was voted down. So
really?
So that is the straight dope on what that document was. That I know I put it out on there on Twitter when I first read it. And so the deal is that the delegation from Georgia wanted to, and I don't know how many people in the House of Delegates supported this motion or how the proceedings went, because none of that is available to me. But all I know is that it was not adopted. And so the AMA is not now recommending the use of hydroxychloroquine. But if you want to look at Resolution 509, it is on the AMA website. Maybe I'll just link it in the show notes, because it's a very interesting document, and it kind of pulls the curtain back a little bit on the amount of ridiculous propaganda that was going on during the early months of this around therapeutics for early phase COVID. And their point is, this is really effective for people that initially get the disease and start developing symptoms, and it can help people, and we recommend it against it, and it's a safe drug that's been in use for 60 years or whatever. And it's still like, I know most of the world has kind of moved on from this. The propaganda against this issue was really effective.
Right.
But I'm not over it. And so I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And apparently the AMA delegation for Georgia is not over it either. So there you go.
Well, let's see. Let's go through it. So it is, what's true about this is that all of the papers decrying the use of hydrochloroquine as potentially dangerous and ineffective have been retracted. Yes.
Yes. Let me read that.
Yeah. So they retracted all their evidence and still won't do it because.
So whereas the original studies published in the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine initially citing harm due to hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine use were retracted by said journals due to dubious research methodology and incorrect conclusions.
Conclusions, yeah.
And then whereas data regarding harm have been limited due to poorly designed studies usually in stage 2 or later, or stopped without harm but no effect in phase 2. So there you go. Either bad methodology that has been retracted, or they were using it in the later phases of COVID where the people pushing it said it's not effective in the later phases. You got to use it early.
Yeah.
But I just wonder how many lives have been lost so that the AMA could help the pharmaceutical companies sell vaccines.
Oh, a lot. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know that anybody's died of COVID at all. That's where I am right now. I don't, because there's so much lies going around. Like you mentioned the New England Journal of Medicine, and just like yesterday, did you see the New England Journal of Medicine recommends taking off a baby's gender from the birth certificate?
Oh, man.
Because, and I quote, it bears no clinical significance. What? What? What are you talking about, New England Journal of Medicine? They are. See, this is just like when you go back to religion. This is exactly the same as in, say, the 1300s, prohibiting a male doctor from examining a female patient below the waist for religious purposes. So it's no clinical significance. Like, what are you talking about? Of course there's of course it would be a clinical significance. You just don't want to do it for a religious reason, which is fine. But just state that's what you're doing. Right? And this is all, it's like, well, the sex of a baby bears no clinical significance. That is the most asinine statement that has ever been uttered.
Right.
And the New England Journal of Medicine put it out. I think they even put it on their Twitter. If you want to go verify me here.
Oh man.
They put it, and then so that's when people do that, it's like, well, why would I trust you about anything? You know?
Yeah.
Especially about other medical things. I mean, like, yeah, that's what I'm just now I'm now like, well, I just tell people no one's died of COVID. I say not one single person. It drives them insane.
Yeah.
And I don't really believe that, but I sort of maybe could believe it.
Well, it's an effective way to point out the zero information fidelity environment that this has become, where everybody is lying, probably for political reasons or for money reasons.
Right.
Because there's like this AMA thing is a perfect example. I mean, you use a whole bunch of studies that were baloney to direct how people are cared for money making purposes. I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, and this is part of the reason I wanted to start spam our journal.
Yep.
So that we could write articles that could be cited and used as evidence for people that want. And when it would it be backed by anything? No. Mm-hmm. It would just be an article that we published, and people would be like, source, when you made an argument, and then I'd say, yeah, I got a source, and I'd just point them to this article, a website that I made up.
Yeah.
right? And it would be like the Journal of uh really the Journal of Great Science or something.
Yep.
The Journal of Better Science. Or Better Science Journal, we could say that. People would love it. Better Science Journal.
There you go.
So yeah, right here. And then, we give everyone that writes for it a PhD, because anyone can give you a PhD, right? I can
Right.
say, I guess. In fact, we haven't done that in a while. We gave Duke of Alba a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of our emeritus.
Yep.
I think we should give one to Chad Wolf.
Okay.
I believe he should have a PhD in molecular biology.
It is duly conferred. Congratulations,
And so
Chad Wolf.
so see, this is all that happens, just with more pomp and circumstance in universities.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Chad Wolf will write us if we ever need something to be written. If we ever want to make up something about molecular biology, like that the vaccine, I don't know, gives you AIDS, he can just write it up and put his PhD there.
Yeah.
Little paper, and I'll say the vaccine gives you AIDS, and like, what are you talking about? I'm like, see this source, and then I'll link to the source, and they'll be like, oh man, he's got a source.
Yep.
And that's all it is. It's just
That's all. During the election stuff, I was going through and clicking through sources on stories from major networks, and clicking through, and a lot of times I would end up at a website like Lead Stories or something that nobody's ever heard of, that is essentially Snopes.
Yeah.
Or something of that caliber.
Like, follow the trail of source.
Yeah.
And you eventually end up in just, there's just a Mad Hatter at a tea party throwing cards at the wall.
Yeah.
And be like, see?
This whole year has been in large part just made up sources.
Yeah,
on admittedly on all sides.
Yeah, on all sides. Just
yeah.
Next time someone gives you a source, just click it, and then see where they get their information, and click that, and just follow it all the way down, and eventually it gets to something, or it'll do one of two things. One, the one source will then reference a source that you reached to get to it.
Yep.
So it makes a circle. In which case you're like, oh man, this has just come out of the ether. This is like knowledge that just popped up. Boop. Here's it. It's a self-referential source, or it will go to some crazy like thing no one's ever heard of, which is just, again, like the Mad Hatter going, it's a very merry birthday. It's a very merry birthday to you. Boop, 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 boop. And then they're just pumping out science articles. A very merry birthday to you. Doo, doo, doo. Sex
and the thing is, if they just
on birth certificates offer no clinical utility. Do do do.
So do you think the New England Journal of Medicine will later retract that quietly to save?
I don't know.
To save the reputation.
Maybe. I mean, here's the thing. It says, quote, sex designations on birth certificates offer no clinical utility, and they can be harmful for intersex or transgender people. Moving such designations below the line of demarcation would not compromise the birth certificate's public health function, but could avoid harm. What does that even mean?
I have no idea what that means.
Below the line of demarcation. And then, first of all, sex designations offer no clinical utility. Okay. Not true. Whether a patient is a male or a female has a lot of clinical useful information in it. Just right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like age, sex, race. They ask you that on medical forms because it matters.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you need because different ethnicities have different health problems, they need different. This is one of the ways biological race is real, is because you're more likely to reject an organ from someone that's not the same race as you because it's more genetically different, right?
And just many health metrics are divided up by sex because our chemistry is different,
Yeah, male chemistry is different than it's all. And so when they said the first word of this is medical nonsense. Sex designations on birth certificates offer no clinical utility.
I mean, you're gonna have like babies diagnosed with low T or something. It doesn't.
That doesn't. The first word of that is just a faith statement of a new religion. It's just because that's all that is. It's just like saying, it's no different than like people being like, there is no evidence whatsoever for evolution. Now, I've ragged against evolution several times on the show. There's big problems with it, but there is some evidence for stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone puts out a thing, is like, look, there's zero evidence that I can't even come up with something as silly that the religious right had said over the past 20 years as there's no clinical utility of sex designations. I can't even come up with something as silly as that. But it is just a faith statement. That's all. And people are encouraged to make their faith statements, and then they're like, well, reality couldn't be different than this religion that we're constructing because this religion is true, right? And then you just
So what's the New England Journal of Medicine going to do for the large numbers of babies that are born with minor birth defects on their genitals and require surgery? You know,
well, they're not going to do. They can't do anything
because they can't designate. You know, like how do you even know what surgery you're supposed to do if you don't know if it's a boy or a girl? You know,
right?
Yeah,
you don't know. Well, we should invent it. We have to invent a third gender. Where
it's babies. It's already been invented.
Yeah. So this whole vaccine, and it's when you look at it with eyes of like, oh, this is it starts to make a lot more sense because people are like, oh, you're unclean, or now you're clean, or you're pure, or now you're not pure, or we need this just look at that. Go back and look at that photo of the nurse receiving the vaccine with her hands folded in prayer.
Yeah.
And then she falls down and faints. Now that could have been an emotional fainting. She could have been scared of the camera.
She was in ecstasy. No, she was in religious ecstasy.
She could have been in religious ecstasy. But like, this is what I mean, like people will point to that as like, but a lot of people have gotten the vaccine by now, and most of them, to my knowledge, haven't fainted.
Right.
Although, maybe they do, and no one's just saying anything about it. So I don't, I think it's probably not a main side effect, but, you don't know. And people are like, she fell down, and they're like, oh yeah, we're just not the vaccine. Like, you don't know anything. What are you talking about?
Well, some people were saying, oh, some people faint after they get an injection or have blood drawn. It's like, yeah, that's true. I know people that do that, but they know that they do that, and they probably wouldn't be the one to volunteer to do it on camera and then give a speech afterward.
Oh no, they'd 100% do that.
Yeah.
If you see, it's like the. Did you see that lady that she was on social media? Because social media encourages everyone to be insanely narcissistic. Yeah. Did you see that woman that was like, I'm stuck in traffic, and it was a picture of herself like in the car, and she's all sad. She had all these likes. Like, oh, we're sorry, you're stuck in traffic. Like, she's like, I've been stuck in traffic for 5 hours. I can't even. And then, like, in the reflection of her sunglasses, you could see she was just parked in a parking lot. And everyone was like, wait a minute. And like, that's like all these nurses. They get on there and they post a picture of their face. They've had the mask on all day.
Right.
And they're always still in the hospital. To which I would go, well, if you're that worried about it, why would you take your mask off in the hospital? Why wouldn't you wait till you got home? Or like,
yeah, the air is just teeming with deadly virus.
Yeah, I guess. First of all, that doesn't make sense. You just need the photo op of you in the hospital to prove that you're a nurse in scrubs, right? You wouldn't be like, and they did. And like I say, I have been to a lot of hospitals. Most of them are fairly empty.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been this whole time. Like, you go through there and it's like, oh, well, most of what they're doing is just not letting other patients come in because of COVID. And then they say, oh, well, we also don't have COVID patients. And so you just have it's like, but if we did have COVID patients, then it would be bad to have other patients here because they might also catch COVID. And then we'd be overrun with COVID patients.
Yeah.
You say, yeah, but right now you have like 3 people? I'm like, yeah, but it couldn't it?
It could, yeah.
And
no, I was talking with a guy who works in the medical industry, and who I know personally, and he was telling me how this whole second wave thing, they're not doing any of the stuff that they did for the first wave, quote unquote, with building the auxiliary treatment areas, in parking garages and tents, and setting up all these big triage tunnels and all this stuff. He said they're not doing any of it because it's ridiculously expensive, and it didn't pay off. Like those facilities were never used in the city where I live near.
That's the biggest tell that it's fake. I mean, that's the biggest tell. Like, I bring this up to people, and there's no argument. I'm like, look, there's been 9 months, right? If this was a real problem, why did literally nobody build even one more ICU room?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, oh, we're gonna run out of ICU beds. Like, did you not build more? ICU rooms are not magical. You just take a floor that has rooms on it, and you put in the fancier equipment and hire more nurses to be there more often. That's all it is.
Well, they did do that in the beginning, and they wasted their money because nobody needed them.
Right, and now they don't have them, and so people are like, we're going to run out of ICU, and then you say, well, why didn't you build more? And they say, well, we did, but we didn't use them, but we might use them this time. And you're like, what? And then the nurses get on there, and they're like, I've been fighting COVID, then why aren't you dead? Yeah. Why aren't you dead? If you've been in that close contact with COVID people for 9 months, and it's this horrible thing, why aren't you dead? Right? Mm-hmm. And then if you're not, then you've already had it in all likelihood, and you're fine, and you don't need the none of it makes any sense.
Yep.
And also in COVID news, did you see the plan? If you guys haven't noticed, to roll out who gets the vaccine has been a racially based plan. Yeah,
that's true.
Because again, it goes along with the religion of the day, which is social justiceism. But yeah, so they've decided to give it to essential, quote unquote essential, even though all these people could just go die in a ditch and nothing would change. Self included, by the way. Because some people consider me essential employee, and I'm like, really? Yeah. It just doesn't matter. But so you go in and they give it to essential employees or whatever, or healthcare workers, over the elderly. Now, by their own models, by the CDC's own models, this will lead to more people dying. Right.
So giving the shots to the essentials rather than the elderly results in more people dying.
Right.
So in the models, why are they doing it?
Well, hold on. I want to specify in their own models, but in reality, it leads to no one else dying because no one dies of COVID. But and nor has ever. Has ever. That's just the line I'm going with now because it's no one has ever died. But okay. But in their models, at least now the reason they cite doing this is because, well, though it leads to more people dying, those people are older, and older people tend to be whiter, and so white people getting a vaccine ahead of black people, or people that are various shades, would be unjust. Now, I don't know if they've looked around, but also true that most of the healthcare industry is white people. There's a lot of black nurses too, and black people that do lab technicians, but it's still mostly white people because there's just more white people in the country. So this, even on their own justification, it doesn't make a lot of sense. No. But they said, look, we can't give it to older people. They skew too white, and so we're not going to give them the vaccine. Now, as it was pointed out by the Lovecraft fellow, whose name I can never remember, people are both upset. People are both think the vaccine is meant to sterilize you or something, and also upset that they're not giving it to white people for racism.
Yeah, you got to pick one, guys.
You got to pick one. And if I was a black guy, and I am, I'm just gonna start claiming that from now on.
Okay.
I'm a black guy. You know
I recognize your lived experience, sir.
Do you know how much I would abuse it if I was like a South African that had moved here, like Elon Musk? I would say I'm an African. I would say that every day, and it would be true.
Yep.
Like I am an African American. That would be. It would be worth being born in South Africa just for that trolling. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, something. Oh yeah, if I was a black guy, I would be very leery of any injection the government wanted to give me first.
Yeah,
based on historical precedent.
Not a great history on this.
Does anybody remember the Tuskegee experiment where they purposely they told them they were giving them an injection, and then they were just giving them syphilis.
Yeah.
To see what happened to people as they saw. And so, if I was a black guy and they're like, listen, for social justice reasons, we have to give you the vaccine first. I'm like, oh, no thanks. I'm good.
Walk away from that.
You go ahead. We'll just go. Let's give it to the elderly first.
Yep.
And let's just look. I get it. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but no, thank you. You know. Yeah. I think some black people feel that way.
I hope they feel that way because this is some shady stuff.
Yeah, because
they got every reason not to trust the government handing them needles.
Yeah, like I've said before, the government, like all these people hate black people. They hate them so much, and they feel guilty about it, which is why they always need to like read books about how to be a black friend or something.
Yep.
Like there's a popular book going around now called The Black Friend, which tells white people how to be friends with black people. And like, if you need a book, if you need a book to tell you how to be friends with a black person, you have a serious problem.
Yeah, for
right?
real, man.
Like, what is your issue? And that's because they hate black people. They're afraid of black people.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to. They interact with black people all weird. None of them have ever had black people. None of them have ever had a black person over to their house. None of them have ever, and then they just act really weird around them, and they don't know what to do, and they assume everyone else does that too. And so then they want to give them the experimental vaccine that's never been tried on people before first. And
it's really sad that condition of that people need a book to figure out how to be friends with a black person. Because I mean, I'm like a child of the Deep South, right? And so where I grew up, everybody just knew how to be friends with each other because there was no getting around it. Right. And there wasn't, like, you didn't need a book to tell you how to do this because you just grew up doing it like a normal human being, okay? But it's the sad state of life in these mega city cultures, especially in outside of the South, where it's a lot more segregated, honestly. And it's like they're the people that have all these problems that they project on deep Southerners. It's really disturbing, honestly.
It is, and also it's like imagine if this vaccine like sterilizes people, like people conspiracy theorists are worried about. And I agree, you shouldn't take it because it's A, it's not necessary, and then B, it might have long-term effects, right? And C, you just shouldn't participate in this weird religion.
Yeah.
It's probably the most important. But, okay, so, but imagine if it does sterilize people and they give it all to black people first and foremost, how that would look like.
Man.
Like, imagine.
Not good.
Imagine. Listen, we got to give it to the black people first. And they're like, you sterilized all the bio PCs. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, we didn't. See, this is the consequences of feed the world. It's like now the social justice movement is cleansing America of Indians more thoroughly than Hernando Cortez could ever do.
So speaking of feed the world, I had probably illegal Christmas party last night, and that was on the Christmas playlist. So we jammed out to. It's actually called "Do They Know It's Christmas" by Band Aid.
Yes, by Band Aid.
And I was gently reproached for making fun of that song because it was written during a giant Ethiopian famine in 1984.
Right, which is fine. And someone said that to me too, and I was like, yeah, I know. But then you would say, then you would say Ethiopia.
Right.
Pretending that all of Africa, and then still playing it.
Mm-hmm.
40 years later, like,
out of context. Yeah.
Like, it should be like, listen, there's problems in Ethiopia. We should go help them.
Specifically in the year 1984.
But see, but no, because that's not, people say that, but it's like, no, my point still holds, because the lyrics of the song are, where no rain ever falls, where nothing ever grows, no rain or river flows.
Yeah,
Do they know it's Christmas? Like, what are you, Africa, there won't be snow in Africa this Christmas. None of it is about Ethiopia. It's all about how Africa is this hellscape.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is like, Ethiopia had a problem in 1984, again, largely caused by Western intervention because they were trying to stoke wars and all this stuff. There's no reason that Ethiopia should have had a famine.
Yeah.
But people just, and so if they just got out of the way, right? But if that song was about that, they'd be like, well, we can, Ethiopia's got a problem because we keep bombing them. And we fund all the civil wars they have. And we give money to the warlords there so they will do, that's what this song would be about.
Time for the remake.
And we give money to the warlords there to fund the civil war so that our people can be there. So they will create a leader who will allow Goldman Sachs to come in and give everyone a mortgage. That's what it's been about, right? That's all it was. That's all it's ever been, is like, we need, and I'm not, communism is also equally bad, right? But but a lot of the wars for quote unquote democracy have just simply been, we need to install a leader in this country that will allow a big corporation to come in and start fleecing people of their money.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it's been. Just like I was saying with the social, like, they're clearing the what was it? Which baseball team can no longer be called the Chiefs or the Indians or something?
It's the Cleveland Indians.
The Cleveland Indians, there can't be. And then the football team was the Chiefs, right? I don't follow sports.
The Washington Redskins.
And
I don't know if the Kansas City
somebody's named
Chiefs.
the Chiefs.
The Kansas City Chiefs.
Are they still the Kansas City Chiefs?
I'm not sure.
They won't be for long.
No.
And then they got rid of the girl in Land O'Lakes butter.
Which, that was unnecessary.
But here's my point. In their quest for racial equality, they're just erasing all public presences of Indians.
Yeah.
We must get rid of all the Indians to help the Indians.
They're like not even going to exist anymore, man.
Yeah, all public representations of Indians must go away.
Right.
Because they are racist.
Right.
And then, so then you just basically, more completely than the conquistadors ever could have hoped for.
Yeah.
You just erase them from public consciousness. Just
in
the name of feed the world,
Well, so the Cleveland Indian and the Land O'Lakes, what do they call them? Squaw.
Squaw, the butter.
She looked
happy.
She looked happy and healthy, and so did the Cleveland Indians guy, and that's not allowed because the only thing you're supposed to know about the Indians is the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson. That's the only, and you're supposed to learn it at public school, and that's all you need to know about them. That's it. That and Disney's Pocahontas. That's okay too. Yeah, is Disney's Pocahontas going to get canceled?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that one would deserve to get canceled because that movie's awful. And
true.
The real Pocahontas was awful too. I just didn't
Oh,
like
really?
her. She was all uppity, going to Britain and stuff.
Did she
She
go
was
to
all
Britain
like,
really?
"Oh yeah," she went to go visit the Queen, and she's
Oh,
like,
wow.
and she was like being like, "I myself am an Indian queen," and it's like that.
Mm.
It's really you're really really Pocahontas,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But yeah, so okay, so that we talked about vaccine. Let's talk about the other big item of news today, which is my personal conspiracy theory. We'll
Okay.
call it about what is currently happening in the world. So
It's kind of a
there,
big topic.
well, you know what I mean. There's been this talk of a cyber attack. You've seen the cyber attack.
Yeah. Keep hearing
The
about
cyber
this.
attack. The cyber attack. All right, so here's the basic rundown of the cyber attack. The quote unquote. There's this company called FireEye, if I remember correctly.
Yep. Well, that was the first one.
Yeah. Okay. So FireEye is a company that they consider themselves quote unquote white hat hackers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the computer nerd world, there's white hats and black hats in like cowboy western style. And black hats are bad and white hats are good. But the reality is that everyone's really sort of a gray hat. Because in order to be a good hacker, to protect against hacking, you have to know how to do the bad hacking. So FireEye is a company that offers consulting and software for big companies to protect against cyber attacks, right?
Right.
And they have and they do it for like really big companies and like the military and stuff, like Fortune 500, companies, trading companies, banks, Visa, all this military, all this stuff. Okay. So FireEye has an offensive division where they try to come up with exploits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in doing these exploits, they have, and they're well funded. They get a lot of government money, and they have made basically a suite of like tremendously effective cyber hacking tools and viruses.
Gotcha.
And then they say, okay, here's what's possible. Here's our suite of this is what's possible, and we need to help you protect against such things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so like, was it back in March maybe? I forget because the news is just rolling out now, but the actual happenings were earlier.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
It was a while ago. FireEye themselves were hacked, and all of their tools were stolen.
That's embarrassing.
It's very embarrassing, and it's also it's like here we have this chest of cyber weapons of mass destruction, and then someone came in and basically stole the chest of cyber weapons of mass destruction. They just took it away, and I mean, they copied it, and they're like, oh goodness, this is bad. Okay, so that's A. B, there's this other company called SolarWinds. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, SolarWinds is a company that provides basically computer diagnostics. So, companies install it on their servers and stuff, and you look at it and it says, oh, your computer's feeling good today, or this computer's having problems, or look at this one over here, right? It's just a computer system diagnostic tool, basically. Again, also used by all sorts of big corporations, by banks, credit card companies, utility companies, the military, all this stuff. The NSA itself uses it. Well, they were apparently someone somehow put in a Trojan horse exploit into their latest version, and so then they sent out an update like, here's our latest version, everyone update. And some people did, and they downloaded the update, and that Trojan horse basically leaves the back door to your computer system wide open if someone knows how to do it. So we have two steals that went on. So basically what happened is everyone in these big companies that have this solar wind thing, their shields are down, and there's someone roaming around with weapons of mass destruction.
Mm.
So that their walls are down, and the other guy's got a big gun. It's basically what's
not good. Not good.
It's not good. And the scapegoat for this was immediately Russia. It's Russia.
Yeah, I mean,
we're haunted by now. If you ask the question, is there evidence that this is Russia? Everyone will say, "Of course it's Russia." And then you say, "Okay, but where's the evidence?" And they say, "Well, we don't know that it is for sure, but who else could it be?" Right?
Well, I could name one.
It could be. It could be. Honestly, cyber attacks are not. They don't require like a huge amount of money. Like, it's not like fielding an army, right? It's not the same as like having a mass amount of troops.
I mean, you need a big botnet to wield in a lot of cases, right?
You need a big botnet, but the amount of funds required to stage a cyber war is in the range of a lot more countries than it is to stage a shooting war.
Okay, yeah.
Right? That's my point. And so
Fair
it could be a
statement.
lot of people, honestly. It could be the Chinese. There's one easy one. Chinese could easily pull this off. It could be India could do it, right? There's no problem. I mean, any mid-sized country of sufficient size and wealth could, in theory, pull this off if they really wanted to. All right. So, but they're just like, it's Russia, because the spirit of Russiagate, again, you know, the faith needs its bad guys, and Russia's bad. Yep. And so it's just Russia. And then as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, he said I keep asking, like, what ties these cyber attacks to Russia specifically? Like, why are we just assuming it's Russia? Did any of it come from, what was it? And they're like, well, we don't know. No, there's no evidence it's Russia. That's just something going around, okay? All right. Now, here's what I think is happening. When you combine that with, over the election season, and even after, Biden and Kamala would repeatedly use the phrase "dark winter." Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Dark winter, and also, oddly, that is the name of a book by Tom Clancy, I think. Dark Winter.
I think it's Dean Koontz.
Dean Koontz, well, same person. In their writing style. I mean,
we could both be wrong.
Dean Koontz is just trying to do Tom Clancy.
Okay.
So apparently that novel in the Hunter Biden emails was how Hunter referred to himself or his dad, I forget, as a character in that novel. Like, that was a code name for him, which is strange. I don't know that has anything to do with it, but it's weird. So they kept saying we're heading into a dark winter. And then there was Klaus Schwab. Remember Klaus Schwab?
I do. Bond villain extraordinaire.
He's Bond villain extraordinaire. I'm gonna send you a clip. Maybe you can play it on our show here.
Okay.
Because I think it's helpful. But he was talking about, and hopefully we'll pull this clip up in a second. He said, this was back maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. Maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. And it was, he said, he's this German fellow. He's like 85. He's a billionaire. He wears great, weird magic robes. He hasn't returned my email about how to get them. But he got up there and he said, now, this pandemic has exposed us to problems in our global system. But imagine if we had a global cyber pandemic, which would take out the grid and transportation and all of these things. Wouldn't that be bad? And we know that it's right there on the corner. And it could be possible at any minute. And he says all this, right? And then the FBI is like, yeah. The FBI retweets him. Like, yeah, we're on it too. And then it just so happens that as recently what's going on is that Google gets shut down briefly. Yep. And they hack the Department of Energy. And there's these rolling cyber attacks that attack everything of government. And they're really just sort of testing the waters. They're just sort of poking, like, how soft is this underbelly? And then, so do you have that clip? Can we play it?
I'm going to try to play it, and if it doesn't come over, I'll edit it in. So here we go.
Okay, we're
This
going
is
to play.
Klaus.
Which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack. To use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity to reflect on the lessons the cybersecurity community can draw and improve our preparedness for a potential cyber pandemic.
Yikes.
Cyber. So is it a coincidence that they've been talking about? Because if you looked at the news, they were talking about the potential for a cyber attack for the past like 3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, they really were. They've been really, and then it just sort of happens. Like that seems a bit convenient, right?
Indeed.
And then, okay, so here's what I think is happening. This is just a theory. I don't know. I'm not really a plan truster. I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is refusing to concede, right? And it's pretty obvious that there was fraud, and there's now like a smoking gun. All this web traffic to Germany and stuff. Like on the night of the servers were in Germany where they were piping all the data to, right? And on election night in the United States, bandwidth between the United States and Frankfurt, Germany, reached a new record.
Oh.
10 terabytes per second peak traffic, which is insane.
Yeah.
Insane amount of data. Okay, so there were all these, and because the Dominion voting software was in Frankfurt, Germany, based out of Frankfurt, Germany. Okay, so Trump is I think there's a smoking gun about what did the majority of the election fraud, and it's a big problem. So Trump is refusing to concede, and he's sort of poised to quote unquote cross the Rubicon.
Mm-hmm.
And what will he? I don't know, but he could. Which is where he basically declares martial law and invokes the Insurrection Act and puts a halt to he's like, listen, I'm not going anywhere because this was a fraudulent election, and now we have a big constitutional crisis and potentially a scenario for things to get a little bit shooty.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In response to this, so Trump is like, well, listen, I know it's fake. You know it's fake. I have evidence that it's fake. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to do the thing. So then they are telegraphing, the other side is telegraphing, well, if you do, here's what our response will be. Right? It's like a chessboard. It's like, we're going to set our things here, and you're going to set it, and if you attack there, I can attack here. And they say, well, we're just going to turn off everything. And to prove that we can, look, because see, the cyber attack, there's no evidence it's Russia. None whatsoever. It's a perfect excuse. If anything turns off, you can just say it was a cyber attack.
Yep.
The reason you can't get your money out of the ATM is a cyber attack by Russia or China or whoever. It's a cyber attack. The reason that the water doesn't work anymore is cyber attack. The reason the power's off is cyber attack because it's a dark winter. See, it's and I have in my private sources, which I do not know how accurate they are, they say it could be an up to 10 days blackout in some areas.
That's nothing. No, that's no big deal. 10 days.
No big deal. But it's enough time to. If you have a, it could be just an internet outage, or it could be if you have a media silence for 10 days, right? Then you can have your fight, and then the TVs come back on, and you're like, oh well, who's in the White House?
Yeah.
You don't know, right? You're like, the TVs come back on, and maybe it's Trump there, and he's like, listen, we had a big time, but here's what happened, and I'm still president. Or it could be that you go, and then they say, listen, we had a big time, and we had to kill Trump, and he tried to lead a revolt, and now he's dead. And it was a big problem, and now it could be either, because they just turn off everything, and then you don't get to see what happens. Right? And then the victor can just tell you what happens afterwards. Right? Whoever wins just gets to tell you what happened.
And I'm sure what we're told after that will be totally truthful.
Yeah, no, whoever wins is not going to tell you the whole full truth of what happened.
Yeah.
Just FYI. If it's your person that wins, what they're not, it's going to be an edited version. But so I think that this cyber attack is basically they're like the more he refused to concede, they're like, listen, we can really do this. Look, we're going to turn off Google. Boop. All Google's, it's back on now, but we can do that. We can do it for longer.
Yeah.
Or look, we hacked the DOE, the Department of Energy. We can really just turn the lights off.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And then now you say, now is this just crazy talk? Well, maybe, but one of the things that makes me think it's more than that is that in the last couple of weeks, Trump's actions have not been the actions of someone getting ready to leave and go on vacation.
True.
Okay, so in the last few weeks, Trump has fired the defense secretary, fired the head of the CIA, removed all of the globalists from the Pentagon Advisory Board, replaced the attorney general with an acting one that specializes in foreign election interference, appointed another attorney from the military who served in the same unit as General Flynn as deputy attorney general. All right. His father also happened to work for JFK, by the way. Signed an executive order outlining military succession. Moved 3 aircraft carriers to the West Coast with a strike group. Moved 2 aircraft carriers to the East Coast with a strike group. Changed federal execution laws to allow bullets and hangings. That's a weird one.
Yeah.
He changed federal execution laws to allow death by firing squad and hanging in the last couple of... Signed an executive order making the 24th a federal holiday for 2020 only.
For 2020 only?
2020 only. Cut off all funding for CIA dark operations and made it so the special operations in the military reports directly to the defense secretary, which he just hired. So, all of that makes it seem like a man that's getting ready. He's getting the pieces in place and the persons in place that he wants to go for it.
Yep.
Now, people are like, why doesn't he just do it? Like, he's setting up I think he may be setting up he may not do it. I don't know. It takes a lot of balls to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also in a position where he knows that, I think he knows if he doesn't, they're going to come after him.
Yeah.
Like they're going to prosecute him after. So he may just be his back against the wall. He's got nothing to lose. But all of those things, especially like some of the big ones to me, are changing it so that the like special forces.
That was a big deal. Yeah.
The Green Berets, the Navy SEALs, all these people, they report directly to his defense secretary now. They don't go for the moment. They don't go to the general of their unit.
Yeah.
They report directly to the defense secretary, which he just put in place after he fired the old one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Their authority structure has been taken out from under the heads of the branches, the other branches.
Right. Change the federal execution laws to allow firing squad and hanging. That's a weird thing for someone to do if they're about to leave office.
Indeed.
Like that's like that. No one is asking. Like no, there was never. Not even the Q people were like, "Hey, you know what we need, Donald? A firing squad. We would really like an executive order to make firing squad legal." Right. Signed executive order outlining military succession. So he changed how, if people get killed, who takes over, right? So I'm just saying, things could get really interesting in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
By interesting, I mean deadly and maybe. But see, that's the thing. Like, there's so many. America is such a big place that all that may happen to you is, well, first of all, nothing may happen. Or your internet just may be down for 10 days.
Yep.
Or your power, and so you should have some candles. Right, and then the TVs come back on, and Trump is there like, hey, it turns out Biden agreed with me, and he conceded, and he left, and now he's living in Argentina, having a great life.
One of them's gonna end up bugging out.
Yeah, which will be code for I killed him.
Right. Yeah.
Or vice versa. They'll be like, hey, Trump just during the outage, Trump saw the error of his ways and he took a vacation to Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
which is where he is now. And no, you can't see him, but that's where he is. He's as dead. He's as dead as Bin Laden, who you could also never see the body of.
Yeah.
And we just, rather than bury in any place where anyone could ever check, we threw in the ocean for some reason.
I did see I saw an awesome Photoshop job of Bin Laden's dead body.
Did you?
Yeah. You know that little picture floating around?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but that was weird. Why did they bury Bin Laden at sea?
Yeah, indeed. Why did they do that?
We killed him, and then it's like. So I'm just saying that we need to be. You may need to get a few candles. Maybe have a couple solar panels to charge your devices. Not that they'll be any good.
Right.
Maybe you can play Candy Crush.
There you go.
While the world ends.
You gotta pass the time.
Yeah, you gotta pass the time. So I think that we are. I don't know. We're in a time where things may get a little spicy, but we'll see. Maybe not. Maybe Trump just won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And but his actions don't He's not backing down at all. He's not like, well, he's still saying, listen, I won. By the way, he's going, look, listen, I won, and people are like, concede, and he's like, well, but I won though.
Well, if he weren't going to go for it, there's no reason for him to still be in the game.
Well, there is cynically, to just drum up more money. Like, give me money so I can fight this, right?
True, yeah.
You could.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There could be a reason. He could just be doing all this for show so people will donate money to him. Like,
mm-hmm.
But see, these other actions he's taking makes it seem a bit...
if his goal were just money, a lot of those things on that list you recited wouldn't really be necessary.
Right. And I also don't think they would be... The other side would be threatening to shut off everything with a massive cyber attack.
Yeah.
But I could just be floating on the wind of a conspiracy theory here. He's also asking for Americans to show up in D.C. on January 6th to protest what he calls Stop the Steal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first one where he's saying, listen, everyone come to the D.C.
Yep. Because that's when the House of Representatives counts the electoral votes on the 6th, I believe.
Yeah, something. Yeah, or something like that. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. We shall see. What are your feelings on that? What's your take?
Well, I think like you come to interpret every projection or prediction by globalist types as a threat, not a prediction.
That's what it is. Yeah. When they cause this stuff to happen, like, again, I should go into this more. Just like the pandemic was, like the World Health Organization in October, November 2019, along with Bill Gates, did a war game of what the world would look like if you had a coronavirus pandemic. Mm-hmm. Isn't that convenient?
Yeah.
Well, and I forget the name of it at the moment, but the World Economic Foundation, led by Klaus Schwab, did a war game a few months ago about what would happen. I think it was called like Cyber Summit 2020 or something, mm-hmm. about what the world would look like if we had a cyber pandemic. They did that a few months ago, right?
Yep.
And so because the general trend is you want to have a global crisis that then quote unquote requires a global solution. So it's like, yep. National governments are not good enough. We need something bigger. We need more organization. We need more bureaucracy, right? And we're just the solution.
And COVID was an attempt at that. At least that's the way I see it. But it's running out of gas now. So if they're gonna keep gaining ground, they need a new strategy.
Global warming is always their go-to.
Yeah.
Right. We have to, and then the pandemic, which is, again, no one has ever died of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And then the cyber pandemic, mm-hmm. right? So that's what they always go to, and so when they say, "Oh, wouldn't it be bad if this happened?" Just that is a threat that's what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
Because they need to prime the public consciousness to accept that it was a threat, so that when it happens, it makes sense to them. It fits the narrative. Like, they're giving you the Christmas tree, like I talked about last time. Like, here's the Christmas tree, and it has all these potential threats on it. And you're like, oh, goodness. So if one of them happens, it's not weird.
And and also they look smart for knowing about it in advance, so then you trust their response to it.
Right. Like, oh, we already prepared for this. Aren't we smart?
I mean, that's one of the reasons why anybody's asking Bill Gates' opinion, is because he was talking about it before it happened.
Yeah, exactly. So you say, oh, see, I predicted this.
I mean, the main reason anybody listens to Bill Gates is because he's a globalist economic warlord, and, you know, if you're living in his ecosystem, you have to curry his favor. So for the media, that means you have to ask him his stupid opinions.
Yeah.
But, you know.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. When they say something like, what if this happened, they're threatening to perhaps do that.
Yep.
Right? So, yeah. So everyone just be ready. Have some extra food on hand, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Have some candles.
Yep.
I don't know what else you can do besides that. Maybe download more episodes of your podcasts so you have something to listen to for a while.
There you go.
Until the grid comes back up.
Mm-hmm.
If it ever does. What if we just spiral into the dark ages again?
It could happen.
Then we're like on December 26th, the lights went off and they never came back on. This is the last time they just never came back on. Listen, I want to make, guys, if the lights go off forever, and we're still going to do this podcast.
Are we?
Even if we don't, we're still going to, we're going to meet up, right? Exactly 6 weeks after the lights go off forever.
Okay.
We're all going to meet up at the Georgia Guidestones. All right? Exactly 6 weeks. So if you want to continue listening to the podcast after the apocalypse, just go there, and I'll still be alive. Smokestack probably will.
Oh, I'll be alive. I ain't walking to the Georgia Guidestones, though, that's for sure. I don't know what you're smoking.
You don't have to walk. You can ride a horse.
Okay. Pick me up. If you get a horse, pick me up on your way.
Okay, but we're all going to meet at in 6 weeks after the lights go off. From the day the lights go off,
okay.
right?
Okay.
We're going to meet there, and then we'll have our next episode. And then we'll discuss where we're going to have the episode after that.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we may just record it on a cassette tape, and then I'll send it out via zine format or something, via the postman.
Here we go. I mean, the USPS will probably still be operating for the whole thing. So if you want to get dispatches from the Mystical American Patriot Society during the outage, contact us through the website, fill out the form, and send us your mailing address.
And we will, if everything goes out, we will send you a cassette tape.
Or something.
Because the show must go on. You can't stop the signal.
It might be a handwritten transcript of the show.
It might be a handwritten podcast.
Yeah.
Or maybe we do it over ham radio.
Oh, yeah.
What if we just podcast it over ham radio? Is anybody doing that?
I need to get a transmitter. I bet those are hard to come by right now.
I think you're not allowed to do that because you're not. I know over you're not on the public stations. You're not allowed to broadcast music.
No, you're not. It's just saying hi, basically.
Yeah, but we could just say hi for a really long time.
Yeah.
So maybe this will turn into a ham radio show. I don't know.
Well, I feel like pirate radio will flourish during the outage. Anyway.
Yes.
You know.
I agree. So before we go into the Dark Night, I was going to talk about the Knights of Spain and the Warriors of the Sun.
Cool.
So the Knights of Spain and the Warriors of the Sun is this book by Charles Hudson that came out in the 80s. It's a great book. It's still the definitive work on the thing about basically reconstructing the path that Hernando Desoto took on his expedition through the American South. Because there were there was basically 3 of his men that were with him on the journey kept basically journals.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about places they went, people they met, what it was like, right? And then there was one guy that wrote a secondary source, and he wrote one about based on secondhand knowledge, similarly like going through the footsteps of where he went. But it was hard to piece together because none of the place names are the same, and the people that live there are gone, and that even little things like the calendars they were using were different, right? So like the calendars the Spanish were using at the time had a day of a nice even number, 365.25 days, right? Whereas now we use like 365 point, I forget, 3 something. It's slightly more accurate about the amount of time it takes the Earth to go around the sun.
Okay.
And so when you factor that in, when they're talking using their calendars about like when they were places, right, and you translate that to now, the dates are off by like 11 days. So even little things like that, like because or they talk about leagues or liga, but there's two different kinds of leagues or liga. Like one was like and it's really dependent on context. Like one is the league you would travel on horseback, and one is the league you travel on foot. And so you're like, well, were they going on foot here? Like if they say it's 30 leagues, is that 30 horse leagues or is that 30 foot leagues? Because that would be a big difference, right? About how far they were traveling.
This is why the Spanish Empire didn't last, is because their units of measure were so screwed up. Yeah,
right. So, he was he wanted to reconstruct the path that they took. And it culminated, I'm sorry, I said it was the 80s, but it was in 1997, his publication of Hudson's The Knights of Spain, Warriors of the Sun. He put together, based on archaeological evidence, this pretty good map of how they went. And he wanted to do this not only for like a historical project, but because he wanted to solve an anthropological question, which at the time they didn't really think about. So until very recently, like I say, 1997, anthropology and archaeology and stuff regarded primitive tribes, let's say quote unquote primitive, as basically static. They just existed the way they did forever, and they didn't really come into history or affect history. It was just like, and I know that sounds super weird because it is a dumb idea, but it was this, again, it was interpreted through this like almost lens of faith as this like Rousseauian noble savage thing.
It's like the continent was a human zoo for just little peaceful people to live out their lives in.
Yeah, the continent was a human zoo for tiny peaceful people to live out their lives in, and they never did anything. They never entered into history. Like bees don't have history, right? They live in tribes and colonies, and they have a queen and stuff, but they never change. They just do what they do. And that was sort of the thought process, like the thought process that had sort of entered in through Rousseau and this noble savage idea, and others like him, was that history was an aberration. Like that was not, like it was caused by like maybe monotheism, or it was caused by patriarchal bloodlines, because they had this idea like, well, in tribal societies, everyone just had sex with everybody, and no one knew who the father of any children were. So they didn't have this desire to pass on heritage from father to son, because no one knew who the son was. So everyone just shared everything in common, and yada yada yada. And so they really sort of believed that like this idea of like history and entering into like a thing where you changed, right, was bad. Like that was basically their version of the fall, because they were in Eden, right? You were in Eden, which was a historyless, unchanging paradise of being a primitive, living off the land at one with nature, and then you fall into history through some ancient sin. And maybe that's monotheism. Maybe that's patriarchal society structures. Whatever it could be. That was sort of how it was cast. And so at this time, in Hudson's time, he has since died. He died in 2013 at the age of, I think, 83. But anyway, at his time, they really didn't consider people that were not quote-unquote Western to have really been changing. And that sounds so weird today because now because Hudson was one of those people that pushed that aside, and now his view has come to dominate. Like, well, no, actually they changed all the time, right? But in 1997, this was a pretty new idea. And the reason he got started on this, and he did this through the Desoto, tracking the Desoto's path, was that he came into contact with Indians today, right? Mm-hmm. And he noted, and he says this very explicitly. He said, "Well, I was interested in all these Indian cultures and stuff, and so I went to go visit, like the Cherokee or I think it was the Choctaw or something like that, and someone in South Carolina and people in Tennessee and stuff, because he was really interested in the Mississippi Indians."
Okay.
And he said, and I got there, and they were like all these white people. Like he says that. He said, and I was confused. I was like, well, how did they? And they were like wearing jeans. And I know this sounds crazy, because it is crazy that you would expect something different. Mm-hmm. But like really sort of in their head, they were just like, if you went to visit these people, they would be the same exact skin tone, the same, like they may, I guess, dress up in clothes, but that would be because we made them. Right. Right? That would be, but like they would want to be doing, but he was like, I observed how their culture was completely different. And then the time I was studying, right, which was 500, 600 years ago, mm-hmm. It was completely different now, and that it didn't seem to be, and not only was their culture different, but the people had changed. They'd interbred with the locals, right, with the Europeans, and now, though they could still trace their lineage, both maternally or paternally, down to like, no, I am an Indian, right, like my grandfather was Chief Scratch'em Bull or whatever, but my skin tone has whitened through the years, right? And he was like, well, this is very. And then he got to thinking, well, then why would we imagine they were static in the past, right? And I know that seems so obvious. Yeah. That seems like such an obvious thing, but it's hard to overstate how much this noble savage sort of myth was sort of there. Mm-hmm. And this sort of like people are unchanging, and they didn't move into and out of history. And
well, it's still with us. It's still with us in our moral judgments of the time.
Correct. It's still with us because we think that like, oh, well, the Indians were all nice and peaceful before Europeans got here, and they introduced like slavery and violence and stuff. And people really believe that, mm-hmm. which is not, I mean, that doesn't, of course the Indians practiced slavery and warfare. Like, why did they have war clubs if they didn't? Like, none of it makes any sense, right? Like they didn't. If that were true, then when the conquistadors showed up, they wouldn't have had armor and weapons. Yeah. Right. They didn't just like make those right then. They had them on hand. You know, they were already organized into ranks and stuff. Mm-hmm. Right, which indicates they were already fighting war. I mean, none of it makes any sense, but we still sort of feel that way. And again, it's do they know it's Christmas time? Like, do they understand that you could kill people? It's like, of course they, like, what? It's this removal of agency from anyone. Again, it's like more racist than you could ever imagine. Yep. It's like, I need a book about how to be a friend to a black person. I need a book about teaching Indians, I guess, that you could do violence. I don't know what they want. But so he went to these places, And he said, these people just look like other Southerners at this point, right? And they still get together and they do their Indian stuff sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But what struck him was, he said, it struck me that their change was not fully external. Like, they weren't forced to change in every way, but I mean, there was external pressures on them, of course, but they also made a lot of internal choices to make different changes and change their belief systems.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to use, and like, this is true. Like, I know a fellow whose last name is Two Bears, and he's white as you can be. But he has blue eyes, but his paternal lineage goes right through to like Cherokee Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And his last name is Two Bears because that's what his father's name was, and that's what his grandfather's name was. And and so it make these people do exist that are like, they can legitimately claim Native American heritage.
Yep.
But they also do not look like what you would imagine a Native American to look like, right? Okay, so Two Bears is a great name, by the way.
That's a solid name.
Yeah, his name is his name is Devin Two Bears, which is a great. It's like he used to do martial arts tournaments with me. And just it would look great because you'd be like on the little bracket, the tournament bracket, and he'd be like Two Bears.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
That's sort of scary.
I wouldn't want to fight that guy.
Who are you fighting next? Someone named Two Bears? There's two, but like TWO Bears. But okay, so he wanted to Hudson wanted to recreate the path of DeSoto, in part to try and form a bridge between the Indians of that time and now. Because he's like, well, we'll use this as a historical anchor point, and we'll say, here's where they are, and then we can work forward to now, and sort of track the changing of these people, right? And because he also pointed out that, like, okay, if you went back to like the 1700s, and you were walking around the forest of, say, Georgia,
mm-hmm.
you might run into a Cherokee Indian, and he would be wearing maybe some linen pants, and he would be decked out with like he'd have a bow and arrow, and he'd also have a flintlock rifle,
mm-hmm.
and stuff, and he would describe like how he dressed. He said, but the important thing, he said, what I realized is that person in the 1700s would seem as alien to the Indians that I had studied my life in the 1500s and 1600s as I would to that person.
Oh, okay.
Like the amount of change that had happened. He's like, I was looking at their culture, and he was like, what the people in the old South during the colonial times are describing as their interactions with Indians. I noticed how different it was, and so he begins to form in his mind this idea of like, oh, these other people, this noble, savage, unchanging isn't true. These people are also changing, and they are also adjusting. They're not only just affected by history, but they're doing history themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're affecting it also. And so he tried to do this grand project, and it really was a big project. It took him like 20 years and a lot of people to track DeSoto steps and try to like anchor down like, where was it, And in the end, he got a pretty precise and detailed, convincing route, sort of grounding where DeSoto was to a pretty good part. Like I believe he anchored the landing of where DeSoto landed as basically in what is now Pensacola, Florida.
Okay. And
it was what they called the Bay of, but see, you had to work out these problems because the Spanish called it the Bay of Ochois or something like that, right? I can't say the Spanish word, but the Bay of Ochois. And they're like, well, where's the Bay of Ochois? We know it's somewhere in Florida, But it's basically in Pensacola Bay. And they did this because the Florida Bureau of Archaeology, under, with some of his help, did a big expedition, and they found these 16th century Spanish ships sort of just sunk in there, rotting, but they're still there, like off the coast of Pensacola.
Oh, awesome.
And they're like, this is probably where they came. And then he goes up, and if you're not familiar with what Desoto did, he basically landed in Pensacola with his men, and then went on like a 4,000-mile trek around the southeastern United States. He went up from Florida up through Georgia, and he went into South Carolina, maybe even a little into North Carolina, tad into Virginia, back down through Tennessee, around through Georgia again, through Alabama, across Mississippi, up into Arkansas, down into Texas, right? Now, he died in Arkansas, sadly, of a fever, and he was buried in the Mississippi River. So the ghost of DeSoto just sort of haunts the Mississippi River, in my mind. But he was done that because he was claiming to be divine, of course, to try and win help over the locals. And so you couldn't let the locals see you be dead if you just claimed to be divine. So he died, and his men were like, what should we do? Just dump him in the river. That way they won't ever see. Right? And so that's how he ended up in the
So what happens when you try to start a cult,
Well, yeah. I mean, so he didn't make it to Texas, but his men did make it to Texas. And what I like about the book, and when you read through the writings of these men that traveled with DeSoto, because they kept a pretty detailed journal, is it it's like that show, I forget the name of the show, but there's that classic line that I like to just play sometimes, where he goes, there's sort of a Men in Black character puts his hand on the shoulder of the other, and he goes, America is not a young land.
Mm-hmm.
You seen that one, right? Because you really get that, like, people think that America, like, just began in 1776 and nothing really happened before then. And that couldn't be, that's so far from the truth. Because DeSoto is going through, and his men, and they are saying, like, in some stretches, they're like, look, there were so many Indians that we would be like at one village and you couldn't help but see the smoke rising of another village off in the distance. And then you'd walk over to that one and there'd be more smoke off in the distance. He's like, there was just these little Indian villages all across the place. And we're going to them. And he said it's sort of maddening because they were local to a degree hard to imagine. He said you would walk 100 miles and they would be speaking an entirely different language.
Oh, man.
And when they did some, and later on when the other Spanish came up, they sent some missionaries out there, and the missionaries did a more detailed, what would you call it, reporting on the language differences, because they wrote back to Spain constantly, and were like, I'm having a lot of trouble converting the Indians, because if I walk 100 miles, they would say, like, it's as different. Their languages 100 miles apart are as different as Spanish is from Chinese.
Wow.
Like it's so they were local on a degree that's really hard for us to get our heads around. These little villages, they were basically, as far as we could tell, sort of self-contained little chiefdoms, and they did interact with each other, of course, but they were extremely sort of isolated because so much of it was based around growing corn, and so everyone would find a little patch where corn grew really well, and they would just sort of stay there. And then but if you had a drought or something, then your tribe would try and come take over, and that's when a lot of conflict happened. But it was just full of these different Indian tribes that all had similar beliefs. Like Cortez notes that they all had sort of
a similar base religion, but they were so they were so isolated that it took on these different forms. But he was like, they all seemed to think that like the East was associated with birth and the West was associated with death, and like there was a Sky Father and an Earth Mother, and you had to do these and the rituals were very similar, but they all had little differences.
Mm-hmm.
And he had more success in some areas telling them about Christianity than others, because there was a missionary journey, but it was also DeSoto was a murdering crazy man, which makes it a paradox.
Yeah.
Because DeSoto, if you don't know about DeSoto came to the Americas in as a teenager when he was like 14.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to Panama, and he lived, I forget the name of the guy, but he took he entered into the estate of this other Spaniard who was known for being exceptionally brutal, because they had constant fights with the locals. And so DeSoto, as a young man, entered into this place where he had to, on the regular, him and his other teenage friends, in order to have food to get through the winter, they would have to stage a raid on some local Indian village.
Whoa.
Right? Because they just didn't have any food. And sometimes the reverse would happen,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have food, and the Indians would try to raid them. And so DeSoto, as like a 15-year-old guy, has already killed multiple people.
Okay.
And he's stolen, and he's led raids. And the way you get ahead in... Basically, the Spanish at this point in time in the Americas lived lives very similar to what you might imagine children around the Somali pirates do now.
Okay.
Because there was piracy on the high seas. They were going back and forth. They were stealing from the locals. The locals were stealing from them. There was... The guy that he was under in his estate would occasionally just randomly kill people Stalin style because he was suspicious of them. He once killed his own son-in-law because he thought he was leading an insurrection, and there was no evidence for that. So DeSoto was trying to do these power politics and everything. And DeSoto really feels like the way he's been inspired by the conquistadors before him. And he's like, I am also going to be I'm going to get, and they're going to give me like, he said, I want all of Florida to be mine, personally.
Right on. It's good to
Now,
have goals.
It's good to have goals. Now, but he only did that because his first goal didn't work out. Because he went with other Spaniards. He was actually part of the... People skip this over with DeSoto, but DeSoto was one of the main military leaders that did the conquest of the Incan Empire. So they discovered the Incans when he was a young boy. Like, there was a ship that went down there, and they came across these guys that had looked like a very developed society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they went back to Spain. They said, hey, can we go? We got to go take them over. And the crown was like, sure. Gave him some funds. And DeSoto was like, I want to go too. And they said, all right, come on. And they put him in charge of, he gets in charge of a cavalry unit, and he's a lancer. And DeSoto and the other men with him, it's about 250 men and their horses. They then basically attempt to and succeed in overthrowing the entire Incan Empire of several million people. Because they were absolutely insane. Their military technology was far better.
Mm-hmm.
But is almost all of that, weirdly, like I've always felt, because I haven't had any experience, obviously, in horse combat. But I never really got why horses were so effective. But everyone said they were so effective because it seems like, well, if you have a bow and arrow, you just shoot the horse.
Right.
Right? But for some reason, I know the horses were armored and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but like a horse, that's a big animal to depend on, and it seems like it would not be that hard to take out the horse.
Right.
But apparently it is, right? Apparently it is. Apparently it's harder than it seems because these horsemen were devastating to the Incas. Anytime they got in a skirmish, these charging lancers, like DeSoto probably killed hundreds of people. Just charging through, Lance, you know. And then and the Incas are in the middle of a civil war at the time, so he's convinced some people that he would help them if they would help him, and then he turned back on them, and they basically sort of overthrew the Incan Empire. And Desoto took an Incan noblewoman as a mistress, and he was like, this is great, but then he didn't lead that expedition, and he got sort of shorted on how much of the land he got, even though he was given hundreds and hundreds of miles of land. He's like, this isn't enough. Not enough. I need more. I know I just overthrew the Incan Empire, but why can't I have all of North America? And so he goes to Spain, and he doesn't like Spain. He's sort of been gone feral in the New World. Everyone in Spain he finds way too civilized.
Okay.
You know, even though Spain at this time is very brutal also, but not by DeSoto standards or Cortez standards, right? Because Spain only could conquer the New World because they just spent 400 years cutting their teeth in constant violence against the Muslims in the Reconquista. Like, the Spanish were extremely warrior culture at this point.
Mm-hmm.
To a level where, like, people would walk on the road and there'd be bandits, and if you killed the bandits, you put their heads on spikes on the road. Like, oof. That level of like they would write about, like, oh yeah, we went through there and there were like 7 heads on the road this time, or like there were only 10 heads only 3 heads on the road. It was been peaceful. Been a peaceful time. There's only 3 severed heads on spikes. So the Spanish have this extreme warrior culture, and they export that to the New World. But the people that are in the New World are even more savage because they have less oversight. There's less civilization. Like I said, DeSoto has been killing people since he was 14 just to live, right? And so he gets there and he's like, these people are pansies. Ugh. I just want their money. But he marries another girl there. He takes a wife there who's also from the New World, because she's the only one that he feels connection to, because she's also savage, right? All the women there, he's like, these women they're not worth anything. And he goes and he says, hey, look, king and queen, I believe that there's a lot of riches in Florida, the newly discovered Florida, which is named for Easter. Do you know that, Florida?
No, I didn't know that.
Ponce de Leon discovered Florida on Easter, and the term for Easter in Spanish is like Pascua de Florida, which means like the festival of flowers.
Oh, okay.
So he's like, I believe that if you give me charter to explore Easter, to explore Florida, I will discover great riches there. I'll send it back to you, and then also as part of my contract, I sort of get the whole thing. And he's like, I'll give you tons of money, but sort of like, and I'm still loyal to the crown, but basically I am the de facto ruler of wherever I go.
Right.
Right. And they were like, okay, sure, why not? The last couple of expeditions they'd funded to Florida failed. The people didn't come back. They died. And so they were like, sure, you can go try. And so they gave him some ships and some money, and he went and he landed in Pensacola. And then he said, well, my contract says that however much land I sort of explore is how much land I get. So we're going. And so he basically tracks over like an eighth of the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And is like mapping it out. And it's like, well, this is mine now, and this is mine. And everywhere he's going, though there are people that live there and like have little chiefdoms and kingdoms, he's like, well, I'm actually the owner now. By the way,
this guy's got chutzpah.
Yeah, he has tremendous chutzpah. He's like, I know I just got here, but I'm actually the king. And they're like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, it's crazy. But here and he pulls out a sword, and then he just grabs the chieftain by the head, and he puts the sword to his neck and says, see, I'm the king. Like, he would really do stuff like that.
Wow.
He'd get up there and he'd meet them and he'd be like, yeah, and then he'd pull out his sword and he'd go, see? Like in the Incan Wars, he got up to the emperor of the Incan Empire, and the emperor was sitting there on his throne, and he received them in, And does DeSoto get off his horse? No. He just charges his horse through the crowd, pulls up the reins right in front of the Emperor, and makes the horse sort of flare its nostrils and breathe in the Emperor's face, like, the horse nostrils.
Yeah.
And then DeSoto's just looking at him like, what are you going to do about it? And he's doing this in a place where he's outnumbered literally like 10,000 to 1. I mean, if you talk about a guy that had chutzpah, the Spanish at this time were maniacs, complete maniacs. And so he's going through the Americas, and his men are sort of interested in documenting it more than he is, right? But he's just there. He's like, this is mine, and I'm just looking at all the stuff that's mine now. He does get into fights. Obviously, he gets into his army almost gets destroyed in Mabila, which is probably where we get the term Mobile, in Mobile, Alabama.
Okay.
Mabila, Mobile. It's probably those Indians there. Now, it's not quite. It's probably more north than current Mobile. It probably wasn't on the coast, but he was walking through there after he just got done going up through the Carolinas, and he's come down from Tennessee, and he's going around following rivers and whatnot, and they get ambushed in the night, and it is pretty bad, but they succeed because they have crossbows. They didn't even have. That's the crazy thing. They weren't even using really firearms. They had very primitive flintlock flintlock rifles.
Okay.
Not even rifles, but they weren't rifles. They were more musketed. But mostly it was crossbows. And so there was just crossbows, horseback, lance, against these Indians who were very good with bows and arrows and had war clubs. And it was they almost lost there, but they didn't. And that was his biggest sort of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes up through, and it's really interesting because you see you can find all these Spanish artifacts of where that sort of anchored DeSoto's journey. Because you can find oh, look here, there's a bunch of Spanish coins. They just gave him gold, just let me through here. And one of the most interesting ones is in Arkansas. The men wrote about they came upon this mound culture, the people that build the mounds.
Yeah.
And they said, we convinced them to, our priest had great success there converting them. And we convinced them to put up a big wooden cross on the top of the mound. And then 20 years ago, the remains of that cross were found.
Wow.
Just sort of buried in the ground on top of one of these mounds. And they were it was like a wooden post. And it was the only one they've ever seen with a wooden post buried in the top of it. And
Right.
This must have, and it's in that area. And so those sorts of things you can sort of anchor where DeSoto went through. But I thought it's a super interesting book for not only because you see what America was before, but also how it changed and how a lot of our perceptions about it are wrong. As is pointed out in the book, both thinking of it in terms of Indians and Spaniards is even wrong. Because Hispania, the area of land, wasn't even Spain. It was several different kingdoms that spoke Spanish. But they didn't consider themselves one thing, and they were often at war with each other. And he points out that Cortez and them, not Cortez, DeSoto, but also Cortez, obviously, did not consider themselves Old World. And they didn't really consider the Americas the New World. They thought, because they still thought they were, for most of the time until DeSoto started his march and was this is really a lot bigger than I was expecting. Mm-hmm. They thought they were basically dealing with, they thought Florida was basically another big Cuba. It was a big island. Right? They figured it's a big island. It's like Puerto Rico. It's something out there. And we're going to reach the end of it. It's going to be mine. And then DeSoto's walking, and he's there's no end in sight here. I'm walking and walking and walking, and we're just keep going up into North America. And so he's discovering this huge place. But he's still really, when he came over, he was still operating under, there's basically the world, which is what's always been thought of as the world, and they're these faraway islands, right?
Mhm.
But the whole idea that there was even a new world wasn't even in their mind while they're conquering it, which is
Interesting.
crazy, right? And the Spaniards don't really think of themselves as Spanish; they think of themselves as Christian. Now that doesn't mean the same thing either now as we would say either, because they did not see it as so much as a religious title as a something you inherited through blood. Like if you were born a Christian, you were a Christian, and that meant you were a Spanish.
Right.
Because they had been at war for like 400 years with other people who were born Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it just didn't. So they were doing it. So the war for Christianity, the pilgrimage of Christianity and spreading it, was tied into like also just like that's just what we are as Spanish people.
So it was sort of a Christian nationalist sort of war rather than a Spanish nation-state sort of war or conquest.
Right. There was no Spanish nation state.
Yeah.
It was sort of a Christian nationalist is probably more accurate. And so you have that, but then also like the Indians are not even Indians. Like I don't mean that in like the standard like Indians, they're Native Americans, they weren't in India.
Mm-hmm.
Like no, like because when you say Native American, you're just replacing the word Indian with Native American. But
Right.
that doesn't solve the problem because they were, like I said, so localized. Like they didn't imagine themselves to be one group either.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't think that they were in the New World. They thought they were at the center of the world, right? And that these people had come from some crazy place outside, and they weren't connected. Like they didn't feel like they were like all Native Americans,
Yeah.
and like they were all at one with each other, So all of the sort of story people have in their minds about how this played out is extremely different. Like, yes, like a lot of the conquistadors were basically Somali pirates.
Yeah.
That's true. But you got to understand that from the perspective of they came up in an environment where you had to do that to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Like they lived on these islands. He was 14, and he gets dropped into a place, and they're like, "Hey, if you want food, you gotta go kill those people."
Wow.
And so that's just and that's just how he came up, and he died young at 45 of a fever and was thrown into the Mississippi River. But yeah, you really get this sense reading this book of how America was in the before times, and you get this lingering like you can still once you sort of go into this history, because you have to learn, we have to reteach people history, because all the history they haven't been taught history, and then two, what they have been taught is wrong and fake and gay. But when you go through this, you realize like, oh well, these people here, like they were all farmers. Like all of the Indians in this, in fact, like Alabama comes from the Spanish Alabamos, which means the plant gatherers.
Huh.
Because these people were farmers.
Okay.
And unlike a lot of the natives they had seen thus far, which were hunter-gatherers. And he didn't get it. It's probably because the southeast area had such good soil that they could do that. But like when they were in Texas and Mexico, they encountered a lot of hunter-gathering societies that were a lot more savage.
Right.
And so I enjoyed the book a lot because someone recommended it to me and said this is a great book about America, because it really paints like what America was like. And then you also got to remember that these people that lived there were themselves immigrants to the place. Mm-hmm. And not that long ago. Like they had come some hundreds of years before, as they spread out across the country.
Yep.
And making these little chiefdoms and stuff. And as DeSoto gets more towards the Mississippi River, the chiefdoms start to become bigger. Like these little isolated places start to be grouped in satellite groups,
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a bigger king over these smaller kingdoms. And so as you get more towards the Aztecs in Mexico, the social structure became more cohesive and larger. And it's sort of like if you imagine the Aztecs as like the center, as you get more into the hinterlands, it splintered a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course Cortez was like, well, I'm just gonna go kill the Aztecs too. But just like, I mean, him and Desoto, because Desoto did that with the Incans, and you read about like how was it even possible that these guys with such small numbers would do and they took their victories as basically confirmation that God was fighting on their side because they were so outlandish.
That's wild.
And maybe it was. Maybe, I mean, I don't. Who's to say? You know. Who's to say whose side God's on any war? You know. I don't know. But because you know, but they would look around and say like, well, that was a pretty outlandish victory, wasn't it? Because even they were sort of like, that was crazy,
right?
Because we just landed here with like 3 ships, and here we go, you know. But yeah, so pick up that. That's a really, I mean, every page of that book is really interesting.
That sounds super cool.
It's the Knights of Spain, Warriors of the Sun. It's a great book, and it goes into all this stuff about. I mean, a lot of it is a little. It's more for a history buff. There's part of it half of it is like a narrative of DeSoto's travel, and half of it is like figuring out where that travel took through, like and how he did it.
Yeah.
And going through like, and here's why we think this is this place and not this place, which in itself is interesting, but you have to be into that sort of thing. You know.
So I have like a meta programming question for you here.
A what?
A programming question. Did you choose these 2 topics together because you think that when the lights go out, we're gonna have to be DeSoto again? We're gonna be living in DeSoto's world.
I didn't really, but I was sort of. When you read back on history and you see how much different things have been, like DeSoto's conception of Christianity, I think most people would agree, is pretty different than modern people's.
Yeah.
Like, but he didn't see any conflict at all, right? And neither did, I mean, the Spanish at this time were extremely, like, even the priests were trained in warfare.
Right.
Because they had to go and fight, and then they would administer last rites to the dying soldiers, but to get to them, you may have to hack someone's head off with a sword to get to them, right? And so the priests were like this warrior priest class. It was crazy.
You know, I find the idea like biblically objectionable. Like I don't think that you can square that. You know, there are some ideas about how Christianity would govern itself or look under certain times of history, but I do feel like the Spanish conquistador model of Christianity is probably not on a solid doctrinal moral basis. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would agree with you, but you know, I think they were. That's what you get when you have 400 years of warfare. I mean, that's just what comes out of it. You know, and so a lot of what people, and this is where I sound like a relativist, but I'm not. But I'm just saying you can understand. It's like, because a lot of what people assume as normal,
right,
and a lot of what people take as like the correct way to think about things is simply based on what they had to do to survive, or how little they had to do. Like in America, until to recently, people have had to do precious little to survive.
Yeah.
And this informs how they think about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is the right way to think about things, what is the wrong way to think about things. And if you are from a culture where you, at 14, have to be a pirate, like in Somalia now, and like that's the thing, like a lot of Somalians right now are either Muslims or Christians or whatever, and they're Somali pirates.
Yeah.
You know? And they're like, well, yeah, look, I mean, I got to do this stuff, but I still like praying too. You know, and so it just really gives you a sense of like, you know, I mean, the range of what people can think, and it makes you, you know, this sort of stuff makes you question, like, again, is your Christmas tree the right Christmas tree that you're hanging your ornaments on?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. Like, if I grew up in an environment where multiple times a year I was in a kill or be killed or kill or starve situation, my frame of reference on what was acceptable behavior for a Christian life would probably be a lot different than it is for me now. You
Oh
know.
yeah, I mean, someone made a point to me the other day, and I think they're right. He was a Hindu fellow.
Yeah.
He said he was an ex-Catholic though, but he said he thought just war theory, because Catholics like to justify things by just war, which they have this just war doctrine, which it has all these. Now in practice, just war just means whatever I'm doing. in practice, because they just go to war and they say after the fact it was just because, right? But in theory, there's like these criteria that have to be met to be just. And his point was like that concept would, in medieval times and up to like the conquistador times, they'd be like, what are you talking about? They thought their view was like war just happens like the changing of the seasons.
Yeah.
It's just a natural thing that occurs. And what do you mean like because people didn't. And it's also true, like people talk about Christian social doctrine or Catholic social teaching or whatever, and he's like, that's also just a cope for religion not being prominent in daily life. Because ancient people, like at this time, like Cortez was not concerned about, like social ideology. He was a consecrated man, and that's how ancient people were consecrated, and then they believed that their lives were devoted to this or that God. And that it's like I have been consecrated and I am part of this thing, right? And other people have not been consecrated. And so it's a very different mindset. And a lot of what we think of today as like what you would do is both a product of how easy life is, but also a product of religion being not as potent as it used to be. Because the idea of someone walking around and being like, well, I'm doing these actions because I'm a consecrated individual. Like, who has that mindset today?
Not many.
Right? But that's how these people, now that doesn't mean that what they were doing was always right, but they didn't see it as like,
right,
I'm doing things in a social lens. They saw it as like, well, this is just, if, it's almost hard to get your head around, like, because they're like, if I'm doing it, it could get to a point where it's like, if I'm doing it, then it is what God wants, because otherwise he wouldn't let me do it. Right. Which is, it's like, if God's which you could see how that would make sense. Like, well, if God's in control of everything, and so if he didn't want me to do this, I wouldn't be doing it. Which is, and then so I'm just saying, it makes you read the book, and it makes you have a very interesting idea of like what, especially Catholicism used to be like, and how different it is now. That's what people say. Like, people talk about this continuity, and it's like sometimes it seems a little strained.
Yeah.
Like this seems like a different religion 500 years, 600 years ago than now. Now, but a lot of the core elements are still there, so you can also be like, well, but it is the same. But also, on some level, it's not the same, right? And that's why you have this constant tension.
I think
the past and the present.
I think Catholics are particularly vulnerable to this because so much of what it is to be Catholic is put into the core elements of religion category.
Yes,
whereas many other branches of Christianity would say, well, what core Christianity is very simple. It's Christ
like
and water and bread and wine,
Or like in Cortez, what was to be Catholic was basically to be Spanish.
Right.
Like if you are Spanish, you are Catholic by default. You could like, they were like, what do you mean you could convert to another religion? No, you can't. What are you talking about? You could be an apostate, I guess, but then you have to die. It was
almost a race and a religion at the same time.
Right. Yeah. It just gives you a very different view. But yeah, it was a great book. I loved that book. I wanted to tell people about it and talk about it a bit.
I think
maybe we will enter to Cortez. I would more like to enter into Indian village time, where I spoke a little different language and raised some corn.
I mean, that would be rad.
Myself.
That's not not a bad gig.
I've always really enjoyed Native American patterns, like the Navajo patterns and stuff. Those are the best traditional patterns to me.
So
Celtic knots are okay. I like Celtic knots, but they're not as good as the Navajo really had the best aesthetic to me.
Yeah.
Navajo nailed it.
They did. Good job, Navajo.
Yeah, I have all kinds of Navajo stuff. I love that. I just declare that I'm Navajo and I'm a black man.
So if the lights go out, do you think you'll be left alone in peace to raise corn like an Alabama Indian tribe?
Maybe. Like I was saying, well, this is a topic for another show. But if you want to be self sufficient, you gotta start with livestock, not corn. I don't have any corn. We have rabbits.
Okay, we'll get some rabbits. Cool. Well, anything to close up with?
No, I think that's all.
Well, it's been.
Stay safe, everybody, in the coming darkness period.
Send us your mailing address if you want to get letters from us while the internet is down, and we'll send you letters.
Yes.
I have the feeling that not a lot of people are going to send us their home address.
Well, you can do mail forwarding. This is something you learn with van life.
Well, that's true. You can get a P.O. box.
Look, 6 weeks after the lights go out, Georgia Guidestones.
I'm not showing up. I'm not doing that.
I'm gonna be there. Why won't you be there?
If you pick me up in a wagon or something, I might come.
I'm just telling you, everyone. All right, everyone be there. I'll have to choose a new co-host.
yeah,
because
probably.
He's not coming. So first one there gets to be the new co-host.
At that point, I'll be a local warlord, and I'll be too busy to do this.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe. Show up in the wagon, we'll talk.
Okay.